The Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt often had to act through deputies or representatives, particularly in the later years. Al-Imam al-Mahdi had 4 deputies, men who carried out important functions and fulfilled the directives of the 12th Imam. Who were these men? What were their lives like? How do they impact us today? Let's find out. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. Allah says that we have made certain people to be our divinely appointed leaders for the purpose of guiding humankind and doing so by Allah's command. Thus, even though we cannot physically see that guide, even though that guide is not physically accessible to us, does not mean that he's not present, or that his guidance, his help, and his support for us does not reach us. We know that in the lives of the 12 Imams, particularly the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th Imams, that they often had to act through representatives, through deputies. And this is because the Abbasid regime, and even preceded by this, the Umayyad regime with the earlier Imams, would act with a great deal of oppression and persecution upon the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt. Hence, the Imams were not free to act. They were not free to interact with their followers, to provide guidance, to answer questions, to take religious dues. Hence, the need for representatives who could act throughout the communities, solve the problems on behalf of the Imams, and answer the questions of the people. And as I mentioned, this was particularly true for the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Imams eras. Now, as we get to this point, to understand the importance of these representatives, we must understand the circumstances in which they lived. The great restriction that was placed upon the Shia of the Ahl al-Bayt by the Banu Abbas, the Abbasid regime. And we know that the representatives who were acting on behalf of the Imams, trusted men who would fulfill whatever the Imams were asking them to fulfill, had to carry out a certain number of tasks. They had objectives that they had to fulfill. One of those objectives was to provide guidance to the Shia. The Shia had spread beyond basically the Arabian Peninsula. They had spread into Persia and to other parts. And so now the guidance of the Imams had to reach them. And so these representatives were the source of that guidance that would then be disseminated amongst the people. In addition, the representatives or the deputies of the Imams had to show that there is an authentic source where Shias can turn. If Shias needed a religious question to be answered, if they wanted to be sure that their religious dues, their khums, their zakat was going to the right place, these deputies were the ones who would point to the fact that there is an authentic source, a place where they can turn with utmost certainty. The final thing that the deputies had to carry out was to instill a mentality within the Shia that a time is going to come when they will not be able to physically see the Imam, when they will not be able to meet the Imam or talk to the Imam. And indeed, we are in such a time. Thus, they were trying to create this feeling, this strength, this resiliency inside of the Shia, such that when the age comes when the Imam is no longer present and no longer there in front of them to interact and answer their questions, that they will know how to turn, who to turn to, and how to solve their problems so that they do not shake off the path of God and so that they do not lose their religion in any way, shape, or form. Hence, these deputies, and again focusing in the era of the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Imams, had a very important role to play. And indeed, today, we find ourselves a result of their actions and what they did. And more importantly, we find ourselves able to use the examples of their lives, what they did, how they acted on behalf of the Imams, how they navigated society, to reflect upon ourselves and guide our own selves to what is proper and how we can lead our lives in a proper manner. Let's begin by considering the general objectives and the tasks that they had to carry out. One was that they had to provide proper answers to religious questions. They had to provide all of the Shia who were coming from far and wide, hundreds of miles away, to come to the source, to the place, particularly in Baghdad or Samarra or in those regions where it was known that the Imam was residing, to give an answer. They had to at the same time collect religious dues, khums, zakat, or anything else that was being given. And they had to collect those dues in such a way that they could reassure the person who was giving the due that their religious obligation had been fulfilled, and that that religious due was getting to where it needed to go, meaning the right of the Imam had been fulfilled. Moreover, they had to ensure that the Shia were not disintegrating. In this moment, in these decades, in the lives of the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Imams, we know that the Imams could not go out and meet the Shia easily. Thus, the Shia had a lot of conflicts amongst them. Different sects were being formed. And this is because from one Imam to the next, it was not always easy to know who the next Imam was going to be, especially as you moved further and further away from Baghdad, from Samarra, from Kufa, from those regions where the people knew very intimately who were the close companions of the Imams. Hence, there had to be a means by which they knew who took on the Imamat after one passed and left this world. And so the deputies had to stop the disintegration of the Shia. They had to also ensure that they could keep an eye on the ruling regime. The Abbasid regime was always scheming and plotting, and did not want any way for the Shia to advance, did not want any means by which the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt could carry out their divinely appointed tasks. Hence, the deputies of the Imams always kept a vigilant eye upon the regime and its activities, so they could keep the Imam safe and they can keep the Shia safe at the same time. Moreover, they had to collectively bring the Shia together so that their actions could be cohesive, properly coordinated so that the Shia can benefit and so that whatever the Imams were teaching would remain ingrained. So let's begin with the first deputy of Al-Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif. We know that at the time of Al-Imam al-Askari's demise, he called 40 of his close companions, and in their presence, he announced that a man named Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri is going to be the next deputy, meaning the deputy of his son, the 12th Imam. And the first deputy would be playing a very important role. And we will come to the reason why. But to begin, let's look at who this man was, Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri. Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri, it is related, was a companion of al-Imam al-Hadi, the 10th Imam, and a companion of al-Imam al-Askari, the 11th Imam. However, there are some reports that indicate that he actually was a child growing up in the house of al-Imam al-Jawad, the 9th Imam, and that he was raised in the house of Imamat to some degree, meaning under their tutelage. And it is even reported that the 10th Imam states that al-Amri thiqati. When he said that al-Amri is my thiqa, he meant that al-Amri, or Uthman ibn Saeed, the first deputy of al-Imam al-Mahdi, is one of my trusted representatives. So much so that the 10th Imam was even reported to have said that if you hear him saying anything to you, you can accept with certainty that it is coming from me. Thus, when the 11th Imam announced to the 40 companions that I am about to pass from this world, and announced that the 12th Imam is going to be his son, the 12th Imam, and that his first deputy is going to be a man named Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri, the Shia rallied around Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri. Now, Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri, unfortunately, in those early days of the Imamat of the 12th Imam, which also marked the shorter or the minor occultation, we know that he faced great challenges, not only because of the strife amongst the Shia, the fighting amongst the Shia about who is the next Imam or how do we know the next Imam is the one who is legitimate, but also due to the fact that there were many spies. The spies of the Abbasid regime constantly had an eye over the Shia and what their activities were, watching the Imams, who they were interacting with, and indeed with the passing of a given Imam, who would be the next one to take on the Imamat. Hence, Uthman ibn Saeed had to act with great care and had to keep his activities concealed, which was another one of the great functions of the deputies of the Imam, was not only to keep the activities concealed, but to do so for the 12th Imam as well, and keep him shielded and protected from any of the machinations of the ruling regime. Another challenge that the first deputy faced was from the uncle of Imam al-Mahdi, Ja'far, who falsely was proclaiming to be the 12th Imam. Uthman ibn Saeed not only dealt with this falsehood, with this conflict that was arising inside of the community, but also, upon the demise of the 11th Imam, decided to move his office from Samarra to Baghdad. When he did so, it is believed by historians that he did that because the ruling regime, the Abbasid, had their headquarters in Samarra, and to move away from them from their vigilant eye, he moved to Baghdad, and that would be a more centralized location from which to carry out the activities of the 12th Imam. At that time, the Abbasid Khalif was a man named al-Mu'tamid. And so the first deputy had all of these difficult circumstances by which he had to conduct the activities of the 12th Imam. Now we know that in the 260th year after Hijrah, which is the year marking the Imamat of the 12th Imam, the beginning of the minor occultation, the start of the deputyship of Uthman ibn Saeed, that the difficult challenges that faced the Shia in those days would continue. Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri, his deputyship continued for 7 years. And in those 7 years, he not only acted on behalf of the Imam, but he was the first of the 4 deputies to start a system of what is called tawqi'. Tawqi' was the signature or emblem or stamp of the 12th Imam that let the Shia know that any instructions or guidance or answers to religious questions were authentic because they bore that signature. So the tawqi' of the 12th Imam, if it ever came out, pointed to the fact that this was legitimate, that whatever was in the hands was legitimate. Moreover, the first deputy, being a thiqa, being a trusted source, could be relied upon. This dispelled the suspicion, the myths that were rising up, the false beliefs that were creeping into Shiaism. My dear brothers and sisters, even today, this is a message to us to learn from, that we cannot allow suspicious acts to enter into our religion. We cannot allow things that are not a part of religion to creep into the tenets of our faith and our practice. And, more importantly, as was exemplified during the time of the deputies, we must turn to the trusted sources that will point to us what is proper, what is correct, and what should be done in a reasonable manner according to Allah's religion. These are the lessons that we learn. After 7 years of deputyship, Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri passed from this world. So approximately 267 after Hijrah, he left and departed from this world, and he returned to his maker. It is related that Uthman ibn Saeed al Amri is buried in the Jabilla Mosque in the western part of Baghdad. And even to today, people go and visit him. And why? Because what he stood for, how he acted, and because he was a trusted companion of the Imam, something that we should engender within ourselves. And he did so not without leaving the next deputy, based on the instructions of the 12th Imam, ready and waiting to continue the task. In the next episode, tune in to find out about the second deputy, who carried on the legacy of his father. This was Muhammad ibn Uthman al Amri, the son of the first deputy, who has a beautiful life and who leaves a great legacy and a great example for us. With that, I wish you well. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.